everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the final day of the California Small Farm Conference and the final lightning session round. So if you are looking for the ecological farming lightning session, you're in the right place. Thanks so much for being with us today. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and we're really excited to have today's lineup, as well as all of you here to learn and engage and hopefully come away with a few insights. Want to give a big thanks to our presenters, of course, but also to our conference organizers and sponsors who helped make this event possible. Letting everybody know that today's session is being recorded, and there's going to be an evaluation that pops up on your screen at the end. So we want to give us your feedback at the end. It just takes a couple of seconds and helps us out a lot. So thanks again for being here. Also want to really encourage you guys to use the Q&A or chat feature. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen there. If you have any questions for our panelists, any insights that come up, or if you want to share resources, maybe there's a topic that you're really involved in and you want to share some of your own knowledge or resources or places where people can learn more, please feel free to share that right there in the chat throughout the workshop. So this workshop is a lightning session. So it's not your typical webinar that's stretched out over a long time. These are fast and furious sessions that will go by very, very quickly. So first off, kudos to our presenters for jumping in and giving this a try. You're gonna learn a lot over a short amount of time. And while they might not be comprehensive presentations, we hope that it stirs a few questions, raises, a couple of light bulbs up there. And of course, there's more that you can learn, and all of these folks are a wealth of knowledge. So you can follow up with them, and there's more resources we can share about that if there's something you hear and you want to dig in and learn more. Today we're going to be talking about ecological farming. We're going to hear about a number of techniques and practices, and as well as climate smart farming. So we're going to be learning everything from sustainable pest management to planting perennials, for ecological resilience, as well as some of the sort of adaptation to changes in climates, including wildfires here in California. I don't need to tell you that we have a long future of fire ahead of us, and perpetuated by climate change. And as farmers, we have to prepare and be ready for farming during wildfires. So we're going to have a presentation on that to conclude the presentation. So once again, don't forget to put your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Hanna, who is our first presenter. She can talk about beneficial insects on your farm. So Hanna, you're on.
Thanks, Evan. Wait until the presentation pops up. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Evan, for that intro again. Today I'm gonna, is it not running? Should I wait until it's going? Okay, there we go.
And you're good.
Yeah, so everyone, please bear with me on my first Pecha today. So let's get at it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about enhancing beneficial insects on your farm. Hopefully I'll provide some practical examples. Some of this will be new, some of this is what I'm sure you already might know, but pests are really serious. 20% of crop loss worldwide is due to pests. And this is just an example of different pests that I've worked on in my career. And there's a wide variety, many different forms. And so you need to try to figure out different strategies to manage them. One really effective strategy is the use of natural enemies. Oftentimes, there's different natural enemies that you can use. There's predators that consume insect pests, and also parasitoids, which parasitize insect pests, and different parasitoids and predators attack different stages. And so this is just an example of the diversity you might see. There's also it's really important to consider pollination. And this is just an example of different crops that are grown that are highly dependent on pollinators. And you need pollinators to be able to produce these crops. And so I really want to talk a little bit today about managing both natural enemies and pollinators together. With pollinators, oftentimes with pollinator dependent crops, the more diverse and abundant your pollinators are, you can increase your crop yields. And this is actually the case with natural enemies oftentimes too, because you have more protection for your crop plants. And so how do we do this? What do we do to enhance natural enemies and pollinators? Well, they are like a lot of living organisms where they need to survive, they need a home, they need food and water. And I also think it's important to point out that some natural enemies are also pollinators. So that's another reason why I'm talking about these together. Survival. Well, it's as a starting point, important to think about what you are using to, especially chemicals that you're using on your farm to manage pests. UCIPM page has pesticides at the bottom, ranked by the least harmful to natural enemies, honeybees, and the environment. So that's a useful tool. Also, always look at the pesticide label. Oftentimes, pesticide labels have to carry labels and pictures, icons showing that they have special pollinator risks. Make sure you look at your label. There's also a lot of apps that can help you time your sprays to help minimize drift situations. Another practice that you can look at is your tillage practices. This is a picture of a squash bee nest, and a lot of native bees nest in the soil. So the deeper you till, the more of this nest habitat can be wiped out in the soil. So this can be a practice to help protect these nests. And then also you can enhance your numbers of natural enemies or pollinators. This is a picture of Rosa, a member at CAFF, sprinkling predatory mites out to control spider mites. You can purchase many natural enemies and pollinators and enhance your numbers in your farm, particularly when your numbers are low in the beginning and you haven't used many of these practices yet, maybe. This is actually a picture of my master's work. For my master's, I looked at effects of intercropping with red clover living mulch. This has a long flowering time period, and it has the benefit of nitrogen fixation. And so it's a really great cover crop, but there's also a lot of other cover crops you can look at. A lot of companies can help you look at different mixes of cover crop species to use. When you're looking at cover crop mixes, it's good to think about flowers that flower at different time periods. So you're really sustaining that flower resource over a longer period of time and providing that nectar and pollen sources for both pollinators and natural enemies. Another strategy is flowering hedgerows. So this shows flowering hedgerow next to a tomato field. This provides food and habitat for natural enemies and pollinators, and then they can move on to the crop field as they're building up in numbers in the hedgerow system. And next, this practice is an example of companion cropping. So this shows dill next to broccoli. Dill, especially later on in the season, produces really great flowering resources for parasitic wasps that can help protect your broccoli plants. And also providing the structural diversity can help enhance particularly natural enemy species. This is a really interesting practice. So this shows a wheat banker plant, which hosts aphids, but aphids that are only consume grasses and will not consume vegetables in your greenhouse system if you're just growing vegetables. And so the parasitoids can consume the aphids and then move on to the vegetables in your greenhouse system. And that's a really cool system. This is a natural native flowering strip. Pheasants Forever is a group that can help you install these natural riparian zone strips into your farm. And so that's a great, again, source of food and habitat. Another really interesting technique is the use of food sprays. There's been food sprays made out of sugar and yeast-based products, as well as the plant signaling compounds. So plants signal to natural enemies, and they incorporate these in some of the sprays. And when you spray the tree canopy with this, that can bring in natural enemies. Water is one thing that I think a lot of people often forget about, but this is particularly important in drought years. Bees and natural enemies need water as well. So you can either make sure that there's standing water in your farm, or this is just really simple. It's glass beads and water in a bowl. As well as home resources. This shows a bunch of different reed nodes of different sizes, and different species of bees and wasps can inhabit these tubes. And again, this provides a stable home for these insects on your farm. And that's a lot, I know, but if you have questions about any of these practices and want to try it out on your farm, here's my email. Let me know. I'd love to talk to you in more detail about these practices and what the research shows. So yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. Well done, Hanna. Well done. So go ahead and use the chat. Maybe put your email or any other information in there. Folks want to follow up with questions directly, or if you guys have questions about any of the things that Hanna touched on, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll see if we can get those answered before the workshop is up. And Amber here says, "Wow, great job, Hanna." So you got a fan. All right, next up, you mentioned flowering hedgerows and all of that. Next up, we're going to be talking about perennials for economic as well as ecological resilience. And Heidi Herrmann is going to take it from here. So Heidi, you're on.
Okay, great. Thanks for welcoming me. I have my own little slideshow here, and we are going to launch into that. Great. So yeah, again, I'm Heidi Herrmann. I run my own certified organic farm in Santa Rosa. I grow perennial cut flowers, and I'm also faculty at the Santa Rosa Junior College and at Sonoma State. If you have more questions, here's my email. A little bit about perennials and some terms I'll use. The word herbaceous and woody deciduous often go in contact with perennials. The herbaceous perennials have foliage that's above ground for the growing months. This is spring, summer, and fall. And then in winter, they usually go dormant and will virtually be kind of invisible, but their root mass will still kind of reemerge each spring. While the woody deciduous plants will kind of have some above ground kind of content year round, and will be more leafy, produce their flower and fruit stage in the summer. Some perks and appeal of perennials is that it's a long-term investment. You buy a plant, either start it from seed or from start, like a 4-inch plant or a 1 gallon. And once you plant that once, like the image here, asparagus, it could last you about 50 years. So obviously that's a real good financial return for this one planting versus rebuying seeds every year. So this is a single purchase perk. By leaving this plant in the ground year round, and not replanting it every year, you're not disturbing the soil and bringing that dormant seed bank to the surface for weeds to emerge. So once you kind of get a handle on that top initial layer of weeds, it's much lower maintenance, especially if you use wood chips or other kind of a top mulch. These perennials have the ability to sequester more carbon in that they have this large root system, and through that annual cycle of that pulsing of root growth in the spring and then it dying back in the winter and regrowing, that consumes a lot of carbon to create all that above ground material and the resizing of the root system. That root system can also support a lot of fungal networks, and so that undisturbed soil layer really supports a lot of underground growth as well as above ground nesting sites that have the long-term season, not kind of a quick kind of cycle as a lot of annual flowers and vegetable plants do. So nests can be laid, overwintering nests as well on some of the bark. So it's a more kind of stable environment also for the bees, nesting bees, as Hanna mentioned as well. I really appreciate the predictable harvest window of these plants. Again, with this asparagus, I know that it comes in March, and I know that workload, I can anticipate that, my time-wise and my income-wise. And so from an economic standpoint and a workload, I really, the perennials kind of have that year cycle of when I know when they need work. And it's predictable, but it's kind of this boom and bust time of high effort to no effort. So a lot less inputs, purchased inputs, and time inputs. There's not that greenhouse succession that a lot of us are familiar with, the frantic plug trays and the successions. So once they're in the ground, it's really stable and steady. The environmental resilience is definitely in the roots. I always love images like this, which really depict what's going on below the ground. A root system can recover if it's burned, trampled by animal, livestock, or humans, and floods. So we see here in this image, these perennials are really deep rooted, 6-7 feet down, while some of these annuals up here are just going down, up to a foot, maybe at best, beyond a foot. And so that resilience shows up in the nutrients that they're able to pull up from those deeper soil profiles, as well as moisture. So you can go longer between waterings because that soil moisture will be retained deeper down. So longer between waterings are more forgiving. If there is a heat spell, if it hits over 100 degrees, this top layer of a soil will really dry out, while these roots down on these larger perennials will stay cool and keep finding moisture in a wider range. And they're bringing up those nutrients from these deeper soil profiles onto the surface for nutrients for our food, but also for foraging insects as well, and critters. So the marketing of perennials, this refers back to that reliable harvest window and sale. So like rhubarb, I know that comes in right here all spring. It's a real popular up until other fruits show up on the market. And so that's a big financial win for that crop. Similar with the asparagus, as I mentioned earlier, March is its real peak time. So these kind of volume harvests or bulk sales can really establish you in a marketplace and build your reputation. Like, oh, this vendor has rhubarb consistently every year, and the quality is reliable, and you can build customer and a buyer base from that. And also advertisement as well. Every March I'll have asparagus. Like you can advertise that in your Facebook or social media. Anticipate the buyers and kind of prep them. Here I also grow goldenrod. It's a real giant cut flower, and so prepping those buyers with what colors are coming, and I know when its harvest window is going to be on. I grow a lot of perennial cut flowers for their predictable harvest. As I mentioned earlier, I'm in academics, and so that has its school year that's very solid, but I have time in the summer. So I have picked crops that intentionally harvest in my summertime. And you can select crops that work in your specific lifestyle. I grow a lot of lilies and other long-lived perennials. I have a longer list available in a PDF that CAFF will share with some participant attendees or in the chat. So perennials show up in the cut flower world, also as native perennials. This is a real exciting category because so many of them have co-evolved with other species. This would be in relation to their roots and fungal populations, but also migrating pollinators too. They're better adapted to our local soils and migrating pollinators. The little list I provided are nationwide. These plants grow in, I think, all states. And the word multifunction is that they're kind of have very multiple benefits as well. This oatgrass, it's a very popular seller in the cut flower world, but it's also a native perennial bunch grass. Understory strawberry or clover have a medicinal quality and a food sale option as well. The aster up here, I like that they bloom in the fall when there isn't a lot of other pollen-rich plants that are blooming. So it provides a really critical time of year bloom as different pollinators are migrating and moving through that have this really floral rich abundance over a plant of these aster flowers in kind of mid-late fall. And it's a great cut flower as well. So kind of a multi-function there. Perennial food crops, there's a long list here. So these come in at different times of the year, as well as the berries. Some of the berries have a little bit of a woody deciduous quality to them, and others cut back all the way to the ground. There's also a long list of possible field scale crops that CAFF can send out to you as well. And in the herb world, this is culinary and medicinal herbs. There's a lot of perennial choices. Great augment to if you're to your farmer's market table or to selling to chefs. Unique cultural food representation as well. There's a large medicinal herbal practitioner population here in Sonoma County. That a lot of products are made with these. Hops is gaining in popularity. It's a great kind of winter dormant perennial that's gaining economic value with our many breweries. So here's some additional resources. If you have more questions, some books and websites. And that wraps my section up.
All right, thank you, Heidi. So if you have any questions for Heidi about perennials, feel free to drop that in the chat or in the Q&A. And otherwise, thank you so much, Heidi. Next up, we're going to move over to Moet, and she's going to tell us about mapping. So let's get you set up here. You want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Moet Takata, and I work with CAFF. I'm a field technician, and I work on the BIOS and walnuts project, so mainly walnuts. But today I'll be talking about a tool that everyone can use.
All right, you are on.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to be introducing you guys to Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. And it's a mapping tool that you guys can use to map your farms, and it'll help you implement all these ecological farming practices that people are talking about today. So yeah, so GIS is it stands for Geographic Information Systems, and it's a spatial computer system, and it utilizes data that has a corresponding physical location on the Earth's surface. So it allows you to map out your data and observe any spatial patterns that might exist within that data. GIS is great for if you want to map out your farm and learn new things about your farm. This can be things, you can measure spatial things like area and direction and perimeter and things like that. And you can also calculate new variables such as like soil moisture and temperature and things like that. And you can combine all of that to create one map of your farm that's tailored to what you need to know about your farm and what you want to know about your farm. So these are a few examples of GIS, and makes maps that like you commonly see like in the bottom left. You can also map out things like soil moisture, vegetation biomass, land use changes like the sun on the top right. And that's like even over time, even over different years, you can map out these variables using GIS. And so to do this, there are many different types of GIS software you could use. Most popular is ESRI's ArcGIS. QGIS and GrassGIS are free and open source. And then Google Earth it's very intuitive for new users. It is a little simpler in what it can do, but it's great for beginners, I would say. So using these softwares, you can utilize different types of GIS data that might include satellite data or aerial photographs, demographic like census data, elevation data, or even crop data that you might have in an Excel sheet. And you can combine all of this data into a new map from which you can glean new information and new relationships and patterns. So where to get this GIS data? There are many different places. People like to post their own data too. Your local state, county, or city might have their own GIS databases. And you can also make your own GIS data if you have a GPS or maybe an aerial camera like a drone, or there are a lot of different apps that are available to just have you walk your field and input coordinates. So one example is the USGS Earth Explorer website. This is it's a website that provides a lot of different data for free, and you can see a couple examples on the left-hand side there. The specific satellite image is taken by the USDA's NAPE imagery program. And it takes an image every year or so. So not super frequent, but it is free to use. So using that satellite image, you can upload it into the computer software and use it as a template to start digitizing the features and plots of your farm. And by doing this, you create a digital shape to which you can assign data to and then manipulate it within the software. So assigning data to it means you can select a specific plot or object, and you can start typing in data for that specific plot. So it can be stuff like, what kind of crop are you growing there? Or what's the historic weed pressure? Or what were your yields from your last harvest? All these different data things that you want to know are now, they're linked to this digital representation of that physical plot or farm feature. And by assigning data, now you can customize how the map presents it. So you can decide on what parameters you want it to categorize it by. So that could be field name or crop type or yield. You can customize all the colors and labels and everything. And you can create something like this that shows in the legend all these different categories and their corresponding presentation on the map. In addition, since your digital shapes are geo-referenced to the actual coordinates of your farm, you can calculate things like area and perimeter and distance. And this specific example is calculating the acreage of each of these little subplots on this farm. Depending on the size of your farm, you can change the units that it calculates or what it is calculating, and you can do that all within the computer software. Okay, and by calculating area, you can determine things like maybe the amount of seed or compost that you need to purchase, or maybe the rate at which to release beneficial insects like Hanna was talking about, or maybe even like planting cover crops. Anything that is dependent on the size of the subplot or the area that you're dealing with. And once you have your farm digitized, you can, the cool thing about GIS is that each data set is presented as a separate layer. So now you can start layering other types of data onto your farm map. And that kind of data can be things like elevation contours or soil survey data or anything that is relevant to your interests and what you want to learn about your farm. So by doing that, you'll create a map like this. You can see here that this map delineates the different sections of the farm that have different soil types or maybe steeper slopes. And having this kind of map is useful for making any future management decisions, such as, deciding what plants to plant in different sections of your farm. And then utilizing all these tools, you can create a map like this one, which is of a vineyard. And you can see all the little different subplots of this vineyard. This map also utilizes slope data and sun exposure data to calculate sort of what the best area of this vineyard, and it's represented by the orange sections, what areas are best for new plantings of vine or grapes. So this is another map we've made for our BIOS project. This is for cover cropping. You can see what sections of the orchard have it and don't, and what the area of each section is. And so this is very useful for communicating with growers and also making management and research decisions based on cover cropping in walnuts, specifically for this project. And another thing we do with the BIOS project is we implement mating disruption. So this is a map we've made for implementing mating disruption. Depending on the release rate of the product that you use, you can uniformly map out where to place all these pheromone dispensers to control your pests. So you can even map out to the specific tree that you need to hang that pheromone dispenser in. And you can see there are more advanced uses of GIS using imagery analysis of satellite data. You can measure things like vegetation density, temperature and soil moisture, plant moisture, things like that. This is most useful if you can get imagery of your farm throughout the season so you can observe those gradual changes. But this is a more advanced use of GIS. So yeah, so that was just the surface of what GIS is and what it can do. These are a few of the many different resources that exist. And I encourage you to check them out if you're interested in GIS or mapping or just creating a map of your own farm to have to share and look at. So yeah, Thanks, and have fun mapping.
Thank you, Moet. That was great. The technology for mapping has come a really, really, really long way in just the past few years. So
Yeah.
These tools that were once only accessible to scientists and researchers and stuff is really come down and been made accessible to just your everyday farmer. So it's really cool. And thank you for just a quick preview of all the different uses of maps. And again, being able to have a clear picture of what's going on in your farm is going to allow you to make those ecological decisions about how to manage it in the best way, and kind of gives you that bird's eye view or even satellite eye view, right?
Exactly.
And so it's really great. Thank you so much for that presentation. If you have questions for Moet, put those in the chat or in the Q&A, and she'll do her best to answer. And then lastly, we're going to get into climate adaptation questions, which is unfortunately, we can do everything we can to reduce our emissions and to slow the spread of climate change and the impacts. But of course, especially here in California, we know that climate change is already here. We're seeing it in the changes in our weather patterns, in our disasters that are taking place, climate disasters, mostly in the form of wildfires. So we've learned a lot over the past 5 years, and Farmer Campus has stepped up to support that, and we're going to be hearing a little bit about that. So Katie is here to do a little introduction before we get to the presentation. Go for it, Katie.
Thanks, Evan. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Brim from Farmer Campus. It's an online learning platform for farmers and ranchers. We partner with CAFF a lot on our wildfire resilience work. We have a program called Farming Through Wildfire Season that's focused more on wildfire resilience. But today we made just a quick video for you on an intro to wildfire preparedness, just the basics to get you going. But I just wanted to say hello since it's a pre-recorded video. So I'm here. Well, you're welcome to ask questions while it's happening. And I'm also going to drop a workbook into the chat that's free for you to download that has templates of everything that the intro video will go over. And I'm also going to share some other resources, including an online course that's free for farmers and ranchers, podcast videos, and more. And enjoy today's presentation. So glad you're here.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. All right, let's do this.
Hi, I'm Katie Brim.
And I'm Natalia Pinzón.
And we're co-founders of Farmer Campus, an online learning platform for farmers and ranchers. We run a program called Farming Through Wildfire Season. This lightning session is a quick introduction to on-farm fire preparedness. And while we can't cover true wildfire resilience in 7 minutes, there's steps you can take to start getting prepared right away.
First of all, we want to quickly share what we see as the role of farmers, ranchers, and orchardists in living in a wildfire ecology. We think that agriculture is fundamental. Farmers and ranchers manage forests, fuel breaks, and provide buffers and replenish ecosystems that are impacted by wildfires. We've also seen how farmers are critical during wildfire response through mutual aid and helping with recovery. People really look to farmers as community leaders in recovery, and we think that if it's done right, we can integrate agriculture to help us coexist with wildfire ecosystems.
So given that farmers are so essential, we want to make sure you're prepared. I'm going to walk you through using our wildfire resilience workbook, which is now in the chat and downloadable on our webpage. Let's look at the basics of preparedness, which are assessing and reducing risks, increasing your response capacity, and creating your action plan. The great first step is to create a farm or ranch map with clear indication of water sources are located, as well as the location of livestock, buildings, and structures, and farm machinery and equipment, electrical, gas, and water shutoff locations. It's also good to include the location of needed supplies, such as sandbags, fire extinguishers, and areas to relocate farm assets and workers. This is best done ahead of time and shared with your local fire department, and you can even have them come out to your property so they're prepared if a disaster strikes. So now that you've mapped your farm, you can start to understand how at risk are you. To do so, you can do a rapid risk assessment to get a quick look at what your on-farm risk really is, what to prioritize, and what you'll need to do in practice over time to really get yourself prepared. So the rapid assessment covers 4 core aspects. your background risk factors like fuel load and distance to dangerous topography. Then you'll evaluate your defensible space, which is the buffer you create between a building and your property and the grass, trees, and shrubs that surround it. And this reduces the chances that your infrastructure will catch fire. And speaking of infrastructure, we'll next look at structure hardening, including your home and barn. Finally, you'll want to assess your emergency access points. Then over the next year, just slowly chip away at the comprehensive vulnerability self-assessment. This can be a daunting but invaluable task. So check out our free online course with videos that walk you through it. The next most important component of preparedness is getting your disaster plans together and practicing them. These are critical in increasing your capacity to respond quickly and effectively if and when a disaster strikes. The two core plans are your communications plan. So you'll want to create a communication plan with your family members, your farm crew, your neighbors, and your backup support. So establish an emergency communications protocol, including an out-of-area contact in case local phone lines are down, have communication equipment such as two-way radios, and a safe place to meet outside of the disaster's area. Then list important phone numbers and place them and make sure your crew sees them. Then there's your evacuation plan. It's critical that you have a plan to evacuate your farm safely and for emergency responders to access your property effectively during an emergency. Make sure you at least have 2 or more access roads in and out of your property and open all gates during an emergency. Create and delegate tasks for evacuating people and livestock off the property or to a hardened off pasture. Make sure you have emergency go bags stocked in an easy to find location. Finally, agree upon a meetup place once you're evacuated. If you really have no other option, make sure you have a plan to shelter in place. So now you're probably feeling a little overwhelmed. So your action plan is where you choose just a few high priority and impactful pieces from the assessments you've done of your risks and make a quick plan for what you'll tackle first by answering what needs to be done, how you'll do it, planning for your costs, and give yourself a deadline.
Okay, so now we'll look at some key actions that you can take to be more prepared on your farm or ranch. In addition to the basics that Katie shared, we can't overstate the importance of practicing emergency response with your whole crew and backup personnel. Who takes care of what? Where will the animals go? How will you save your crops? Practicing emergency response can reduce your stress during an emergency and actually reduce your potential losses. As part of that, you can set up and test your backup systems in the event of an electrical outage. Make sure your generators work with your cooling systems, your irrigation, and whatever you need to keep the farm running during an outage. Also, make sure that you have water. Take a look at your piping and your fencing and assess whether it can really withstand high heat and winds. We have a comprehensive list that you can look at to increase your readiness on your farm in our workbook. If you have livestock, get an ag pass, which this allows you to access your farm during a disaster when others have to evacuate. Get infrastructure and crop insurance and understand exactly what is covered when there's a fire. You can have your agent visit your land. We also have some financial recovery resources where you can learn more. Finally, you can take your comfort to fires to that next level by getting training through Prescribed Burn Association. What can you do in your community? First and foremost, work with your neighbors on fuel load reduction, evacuation, and response planning. Know who has emergency skills and who has resources, and establish a mutual aid network together. Link up with local organizers who serve as point people during a disaster, or join forces with your local fire safe council or a fire adapted network in your region. So that's a lot, and we understand that only doing one or a few of these tasks can really take a lot of time and money. There are resources to support you. If you need funds to help you prepare, connect with the NRCS, with the RCDs, with your county, your town, your fire district, a local fire safe council, or even consider applying for a CAL fire grant in partnership with other farmers. We especially recommend that you ask your fire department for property evaluation and that you get on the NRCS database before a fire comes. There's a lot more resources to help you recover after a fire that you can find in CAFF's Disaster Clearinghouse, and you can learn more in our online course. Thank you to you and all of our partners and funders.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Natalia and Katie. So wealth of information. We're looking at a very, very dry year yet again. with a lot of fuel load out there. So if you haven't already begun planning, whether you're on a small garden or a large ranch, now is definitely the time to do it if you're pretty much anywhere in California. And unfortunately, fire season seems to extend every single year. We just had a fire yesterday in Sonoma County, and it's March, and we saw that on the Central Coast down by Big Sur. That was what, January? So fire season has extended to pretty much the entire year here in California, and we're looking at a tough year. So check out the resources from Farmer Campus. They did a great job of posting some of those resources in the chat. I also saw that there's a number of great questions about following up on some of those other resources we heard earlier in the chat. If you have any additional questions, put them in the chat there, but we're wrapping up on time here. But I appreciate everybody. Most of these folks can Heidi included her contact information. Moet and Hanna, of course, can be reached through CAFF's BIOS program, and Katie Brim and Natalia at Farmer Campus. So if you have more questions, want more resources, want to get more involved in any of this work, feel free to reach out to them, and let's continue promoting disaster resilience and ecological farming and a climate smart future. Thank you all so much for being a part of today's presentation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. There's a few more workshops here at the California Small Farm Conference, so tune in, as well as the awards ceremony tonight and regional gatherings taking place in 10 different locations tomorrow. So do check that out, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.